Hello and welcome to this tutorial. Today I want to talk about security groups inside the AWS console. Security groups are one of the most important infrastructure services inside the AWS. It's really critical for us to be aware how they are working. As you remember, in previous videos we start working with the EC2 instances, and inside the EC2 instances we configured a little bit the security groups and we deal with adding rules and some of the other settings. But today I want to go deep inside the security groups and start talking more details about them. So if I click on the EC2 inside the AWS console, I'll go to the EC2 instances dashboards, and here you can start configuring the security groups. Before moving forward for the configuration, I would like to just talk a little bit about the security groups. So basically, security groups are a software firewall that you can put your EC2 instances behind the software firewall, that you can allow some traffics and you can technically protect your EC2 instances, and it's a kind of firewall that it resides inside the AWS services. Although we have the operating system firewalls, like if you are using the Windows, you have the Microsoft firewall, or if you have a Linux, you have the IP tables firewall inside your operating system, but this is a separate firewall that you can protect your resources behind it. So let's see how this is gonna work. When we start using AWS, we have a default VPC. So I can see it from even the EC2 dashboard here. When I am in the EC2 dashboard on the right side, I have account attributes, and down here I can see that I am right now in the default VPC. If I click on this default VPC, I'll go back to the VPC dashboard, and inside the VPC dashboard you can see that we have a bunch of security groups here. And right now I am in the Oregon region. Don't forget that your region is also important. I am in the US West Oregon. I have a bunch of security groups because we've already started working with this AWS console. We have a bunch of security groups inside it, and we've actually created these security groups in the previous sessions. So if I change my region, let's say I'll go to Canada, then you'll see that because I've never worked on Canada region on this account, I just have one security group, and that's the default security group. So you bear in mind that we have one default security group when we start using AWS or when we are creating a new VPC. I'm going back to EC2 dashboard, and in EC2 dashboard also we can see the security groups. So I'm going to change to the US West Oregon again. Now I can here on the left side I have a security group. Inside the network and security part, I have the security groups. If I click on the security groups, these are all the security groups that we started creating, started using them. And you can see even the default one. So if I go to this diagram here, you can see this is a very simple diagram. Imagine that this is your VPC. So we have the VPC boundary here. And whenever we have any connection from the internet toward our VPC, that these are the network access lists, and I'll talk about them later. But after sending your traffic, and you'll go through different things, we don't want to talk about them right now, but whenever you are, these are also different softness, for example, but whenever you are trying to hit your EC2 instance, this orange one is your EC2 instance, the last thing that you are hitting before reaching to the EC2 instance is your security group. Basically, security group is a last firewall inside the AWS environment, which is pretty important. So we have to be aware how this one is working, how we can configure it. And then if we go to the OS, then we may deal also with the firewall inside the operating systems. So anyway, I'll go back to the console. So I can see all of the security groups right down here. For testing purposes, I'm going to my EC2 dashboard. If you remember, we already spin a bunch of servers inside the EC2 console. I'm going to start my web server again to take a look at it and start dealing with the security group. So I'm going to pause this video, wait for this one to become available. So if you don't have the EC2 instance, you can build the EC2 instance from the previous videos. You can actually see how you can build the web server and install Apache inside the Linux machine. Basically, if you remember, this is a web server, and I can copy the IP address of this virtual machine, and I can go to another tab and paste it here. I can see the default web page of the Apache because we already installed it inside this EC2 instance. So let's check the security group here. If you go over the EC2 instance, down here you can see in the properties tab, you can see that we have the security group. We can see the name of the security group, we can see the inbound rules, and we can see the outbound rules. If I click on this one, I will go to security groups, and technically it's going to filter that specific security group that is assigned to my EC2 instance. So let's see what kind of information we can see inside the security group. By the way, we can remove this filter and we can see all of them. You can take a look at all of the security groups that I've already have here. Basically, I've created all of these security groups myself before during the tests and other videos. This one is the default one that it comes with installation of a new VPC or with the default VPC. So when we subscribe to the AWS, every region it has a new default VPC and it comes with one default security group. If I click on this one, which is currently in use but by my web server, so it means whenever I'm refreshing this page from I can hit this IP address from the internet. I'll go through the AWS infrastructure, through the VPC, through the network access list, and I'll reach to my EC2 instance. Before actually reaching to the server, I'll have to go through the security group of this EC2 instance, which is this one, and then I can hit the server, I can browse the website. So let's see what kind of information do we have here. So we have descriptions, group name, this is the name of the security group, we have the ID for the security group, and we have the description, which is ITrepo-linux-sg for security group, and then we have VPC ID. So this is our VPC ID that currently our EC2 instance and all other resources like the security group is residing in. If I go to the second tab, we have inbound tab, which is the inbound traffic, and these are the kind of rules that we've already added inside this security group, which is HTTP and SSH. And the second HTTP is actually for the IPv6. The first one is for IPv4, and we basically open the port 80 to be able to hit the web server and start using it. The second tab is mostly the place that we are working with it, and there is another tab for outbound traffic, which you can see by default. It says all traffic, all protocol, and all ports are for any destination open. It means it's wide open. And the last one is tags, which you can add any tag you want for the security group. So going back to the inbound one, what I want to do today is I'm going to edit this rules, and I am going to remove this HTTP, and I'm going to save it. So what I'm testing here is I want to see if I can see the web server again. So if I refresh my page, you can definitely see that it is trying to browse the web server, but it cannot browse it anymore. And down here you can see also connecting. So it means after changing the security group, immediately this rule applies and we cannot see the web server. If you have already worked with firewalls and security rules and different vendors, you may ask why there is no deny rule here at the bottom, because usually the way that firewalls are working are they're checking the rules one by one from top to the bottom, and then if none of them apply, then there is a deny any at the bottom at the end, which that one will apply. But you have to be aware that in AWS security groups, we don't have any deny here. We are not seeing it, but by default, everything is blocked for the inbound connections, and basically you need to open whatever you want to open. So you can see this one is still not working. So if I even close this page and open a new one, you can see that we cannot see this website anymore. And if we wait for a while, we are going to see timeout. So I'm going to pause this video to see what will happen. It was actually pretty fast, and we can see that this site can't be reached, but it is still trying. So I'm going to cancel it, and I'm going to back to my security group. In the inbound rule, I'm going to put back the rule over here to make sure that this is the one is actually applying and it is preventing or access to the EC2 instance. So I put it back there and now try to go back to the tab and hit refresh to see how it works. And you can see immediately after putting the security group rule back, you can browse the website. Maybe it takes, I don't know, 10 to 15 seconds sometimes, but it's right away, and you should be aware of this. The security groups are applying right away after whatever you're doing. So good to know. Another thing that I want to mention here is by default, these security rules inside the security groups are wide open to any IP address. And this is not a good thing. It means that everyone from the internet can access to your EC2 instance if there is any services running on port 80, for example. So my suggestion to you is you always need to narrow down this IP address. And you have different options here. You can put any IP address that you are aware of it. Or if you will connect your on-prem data center or on-prem office to the AWS, you should just put the private IP address of your offices and your data center or your server rooms here. Or another option is you can put your IP address here. If you click on this My IP, your current public IP address that is currently in use on your system will pop up here, and then you can use this one. But make sure that your public IP address is static, because if it's a dynamic one, it's gonna change after a while. I mean, it may change and you can't access your services in the EC2 instance. For the purpose of this demonstration, because this is just a test, I'm going to leave it with any IP address as the source, which is not a good thing for production. Anyway, I'm going to cancel this one. Another thing that I would like to test is related to the outbound settings, and you can see there's a weird configuration here. By default, all traffic is open from the EC2 instance back to the internet, so it means wide open the outbound traffic, which it comes to the idea of the stateful and stateless firewalls. If you are familiar with the stateful firewalls, it means whenever you have any inbound communication, by default the firewall will allow the outbound traffic. When we are trying to reach to our web server on port 80 from the internet, then our web server inside the operating system could be able to establish outbound connections to the internet, and it should be able to respond back to this request on port 80. So that's the meaning of the stateful firewall. But here in the security group, we are seeing a rule for allow all to any destination outbound traffic. For a testing purpose, I'm going to remove this one to see what will happen, and I'm going to save this. It means we don't have any outbound rule inside our security group, and this is pretty important test. If I hit refresh, you can see it's going to work and there is no issue. And even I can make sure that I have the IP address in the clipboard. I can copy paste and go back to the website. It is going to work without any issue. So what is the meaning of this? The meaning is that this rule for allow all traffic outbound of the EC2 instance is not necessary. It means actually the security group is a stateful firewall. It's not stateless. We'll talk more about stateless, and we'll talk more about network access lists inside the VPC, but this is pretty important. I want to repeat it several times. Security groups are stateful firewalls. It means if you establish any inbound connection, you don't need to allow that correspondent outbound traffic, but network access lists, or NACL, that we will talk about them more, which they are in the VPC dashboards, they are stateless firewall. It means if you want to allow outbound connection for a network access list, you need to explicitly add it inside the outbound rules and tell the network access list that you want to have the outbound connection. But here, it's not necessary. I'm just going to put it back for keep the consistency between different security group rules that we have. So I put the all traffic for all ports to any IP address open, and for the any, I'm sure that you're familiar with this 0000/0, which is the meaning is any IP address technically. So I'm going to save it back here, but technically you should be aware, specifically when we start working with codes, we don't need any outbound, any rules for the security groups. It's not really necessary, although by default it's here. Another thing that you may notice is when I go back to the inbound rule, I don't have any deny rule here. When I'm trying to add anything here, there's no deny. So we can't technically block any IP addresses or any specific protocols inside the inbound rules. By default, anything is deny, and we can add new rules for allowing traffic. We can't add, for example, a deny at the top to deny a specific IP address. This is not a location to do this. If you want to do this, we will go to the network access list and start working it in that location. Another thing I would like to talk is, if I go back to my EC2 instances, here in the instances, this is the one that is currently running, and I can see the name of the security group that is currently in use, and I can see the view inbound rules and view outbound rules, which is pretty useful. If I click on this one, on the view inbound rules, I can see a very good view of all the traffics that are allowed. I can see port 80, port 22 for SSH, even the name of the security group that is currently applying to this EC2 instance. One thing that you should be aware is that you can apply multiple security groups also to one single instance. And you can just go to your EC2 instance, right click on it, there is a networking option, and in the networking option we have change security groups. Well, basically we can change our security group here from one to another, and also we can select different security groups and we can apply them to one single EC2 instance. I don't know what are inside these other security groups, but I can guess, because this is a Windows and this is a Windows, for example. We already worked with them in previous videos. Because they are Windowses, probably RDP would be open inside these security groups. We can check actually if I assign these security groups to this web server. I can see right now here that all of these security groups are applying, and if I go to view inbound rules, I should scroll down a little bit to make some room here. If I go to the inbound rules, well, it's pretty useful. Look at here, you can see this rule, the first one is applying from win-demo SG, and the second one is coming from these two, and the third one coming from these two, and this is the last one. And even you can see the overlaps, but there's no problem here because there's no deny rules. Technically, you're just adding up different rules from different security groups. Well, my suggestion to just map it as a one-to-one, one EC2 instance to one security group to make your management much easier. So that was just for the purpose of this demo. I want to show you that this could be possible. I'm going to remove the rest and I'm going to assign it back, and you know now that this is going to be an immediate access. And make sure that you are fully understand the security groups.